Welcome to Trial of the Hollywood Sex Therapist Killer, the harrowing and tragic story of Dr. Amie Harwick, who met a tragic end when she was allegedly thrown off her third-floor balcony by her stalker and ex-boyfriend, Gareth Pursehouse. Found clinging to life, but later succumbing to her injuries, Amie's death has raised many questions, with answers to be revealed in court. Join us as we dive deep into the ongoing trial of Gareth Pursehouse, the man accused of this heinous act, and as we seek justice for Amie.
All jurors are present, including the alternates. The witness has retaken the stand. Mr. Chavez, just a reminder, you're still on the road. We have all counsel present and the defendant. Who is inquiring?
I was.
Mr. Avila, you may continue.
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Chavez. Good morning. The last few questions I asked you were about the text message from Amie Harwick regarding her fear of what happened. Is that correct? Yes. And she indicated to you that she wanted to get more security around her home. Yes. After that, but before February 15, 2020, did you have any more conversations with her?
We spoke periodically throughout the couple of weeks afterwards, yes.
And when did you find out that she had been killed?
Objection relevant. One move. No, that's...
I received a phone call, I believe it was the 16th of February, Sunday.
May I have one moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Do you remember the date when you were first interviewed by detectives?
I do not remember that date.
Would that be on or about February 18th, 2020, about 3 days, about 4 days after Valentine's Day?
Yes, that sounds right.
And did you tell them everything you knew about Amie's fears of the defendant?
Yes.
Did you tell them about what you observed at the XBiz award show?
Yes.
Did you tell them about going to the Bob's Big Boy and what she told you at the Bob's Big Boy?
Yes.
And during the interview, did they ask you about how the defendant came into telephone contact with Amie Harwick?
Yes.
And what did you say on February 18, 2020?
At that time, I had not gone through my phone, pictures or text messages because of grief. So in that meeting, a few days after her death, I mistakenly and erroneously said that I thought she may have given her number to Gareth.
And when were you led to believe that that was incorrect?
Once I went back to look through the text messages, and then the screenshots were then sent to the police for evidence.
And the text message you're talking about is the one dated January 17, 2020, where she states, Gareth found my number online to message me, which is people's number 10, page G. Is that correct?
Yes.
So then that was the correct. Then was your mind corrected as far as that information?
Yes.
I have nothing further on.
Cross-examination, Mr. Franzel.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Good morning.
I'd just like to talk about the timing of the event briefly. The XBiz Awards was on January 16th, 2020, right?
Yes.
And that was a Thursday.
Yes.
You Uber to Miss Harwick's house.
Yes.
That is in the Hollywood Hills, kind of Beechwood Canyon area.
Yes.
And you get to her house around 7 p.m.
Between 6:30 and 7.
Would it refresh your recollection to look at a text chain with you and Miss Harwick?
If there was, yeah, that would be. I knew I was running late. There was an accident on the freeway that I had texted her about.
If I may approach.
Go ahead.
So if you could just read those first 3 text messages in the text chain and look up when you're done, please.
Which part am I?
Okay.
Yeah, Coach. I'll just-
Yes, go ahead.
Sure.
Just. Did that refresh your recollection?
Yes, it did.
And so you arrived at Miss Harwick's house around right before 7 p.m., right?
Yes.
And the 2 of you get into her car,
Yes.
and you drive to the JW Marriott, which is right by LA Live.
Yes.
Do you happen to remember if you took the 101 or some other way?
Picture relevance.
Sustained.
Okay. It's roughly 8 miles, right?
Okay.
I have a Google map that I'd like to mark as Defense A,
Yes, Mark.
showing it to council. May I approach?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recognize this Google map, sir?
Yes.
Is this a Google map that appears to depict the route between 2086 Mound Street and the JW Marriott?
Yes.
Publishing Defense A. So between her house and the location of the event was about 8 miles. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you're driving there on a Thursday evening at about 7 p.m., right?
Yes.
So would you say it took you to probably about 15 or 20 minutes to get there?
That sounds accurate. Yes.
And you park at the LA Library, right?
No, we parked at the JW Marriott parking structure.
This event at the JW Marriott was on multiple floors, right?
Predominantly one floor. They have a downstairs lobby, but that wasn't a part of the events themselves.
So you enter in through the street level,
Yes.
and there's a lobby,
Yes.
and then you go upstairs, and that's where the event was?
Yes.
Okay. Where was the red carpet?
Directly adjacent from the ballroom.
And that was also upstairs.
Yes.
And this was a pretty big event, right?
Yes.
A lot of people.
Yes.
It was pretty crowded, right?
Decently crowded.
And so the first thing that you do when you get there is get in the line to go take pictures on the red carpet.
Yes.
And you were waiting in line with Ms. Harwick and with Ashley Jameson.
Yes.
Were any other people there in your group that was waiting to get online and take pictures?
There were a few other people that I knew, but they weren't necessarily meeting us there or with us. Just people in line that we knew.
And just for clarity's sake, Ashley Jameson also goes by Aspen Jameson
I believe so.
and Aubrey Kate as well.
Yes.
And after waiting for a few minutes in the line to go to the red carpet, you leave to go get other people drinks from the bar.
Yes.
You couldn't see the group of your friends that you had just left from the bar line, right?
No, I couldn't.
And on direct, you testified that, that about 5 minutes after waiting in the bar line, Miss Jameson called you.
Yes.
She told you to get the F back in line for the red carpet.
Yes.
Let's talk about, let's jump forward a little bit. And when Mr. Pursehouse and Ms. Harwick were having their first conversation, you were in line, waiting, holding the spot in line, right?
Yes.
And you were able to observe both Ms. Harwick's demeanor and Mr. Pursehouse's demeanor.
Yes.
And Mr. Pursehouse, you saw putting his head in his hands,
Yes.
putting his hands on his face.
Yes.
his head dropping down into the lap area in a disappointed manner.
Yes.
It appeared to you that he was in duress,
Yes.
a person in distress.
I'm going to object to the terms that are being used based on prior rulings and requests by the defense.
I think that the court, if obviously you couldn't hear what they were saying.
No.
Well, I'm going to allow it in that it appeared. He can't conclusively say that he was in distress or he was depressed or whatever it is, but it appeared to him from his vantage point, and I'll allow it as such. All right, go ahead.
Right. It's clear. It's not like you're next to them during this conversation. Your descriptions are based on what you're observing from the line.
Yes.
And when you walk over to let Amie know that the red carpet was about to close, it appeared to you that Mr. Pursehouse was disappointed that the conversation was ending.
Yes.
During that first conversation, you did not send any text messages to Ms. Harwick.
No.
And Ms. Harwick did not send any text messages to you.
No.
Would it be correct to say that you did not hear Mr. Pursehouse make a verbal threat of violence towards Ms. Harwick? Is that a correct statement?
I consider the use of the word bitch a verbally threatening statement. So no.
My question is, you never heard Mr. Pursehouse make a verbal threat of committing violence on Ms. Harwick.
Objection asked and answered.
Well, he's added to that committing violence. Did you ever hear him make a threat in that committing violence, using those words or something to that effect?
Something to that effect.
No, I didn't.
And Ms. Harwick never told you that Mr. Pursehouse made a verbal threat of violence towards her.
No, she didn't.
Ms. Harwick told you that in the past, she hadn't been comfortable with Mr. Pursehouse working in the adult film industry.
I'm going to object to hearsay.
Sustain.
You had been to Ms. Harwick's home a dozen times or so, right?
Yes.
And in going to her home a dozen times, you had seen her bed unmade.
Objection relevance.
Sustain.
If I may make an offer of proof.
No, counsel, move on.
On direct, you testified that you and Ms. Harwick received your doctoral degrees from the same institution.
Yes.
What is the name of that institution?
The Institute for the Advanced Study of Human Sexuality. It was a private school in San Francisco.
Now, after the XBiz Awards, you and Ms. Harwick sent each other photographs that you each had taken that night.
Yes.
Do you recall whether you sent those photographs after you each had gotten home that night, or were you in person, sending to each other in person?
I believe we sent them at Bob's Big Boy together. She sent all of hers, I sent all of mine.
You knew Ms. Harwick for a long time. Right?
Yes.
And she was an athletic person, right?
Yes.
Went on runs.
I'm going to object relevance.
Well, I'll allow some leeway. It'll stand that she was an athletic person. So let's move on from there.
This is my final question.
Go ahead.
She had a background in dance.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. His answer stands.
So,
And his answer was yes.
thank you. I want now to talk about the statement that on direct you said you heard Mr. Pursehouse make. Specifically, you ruined my life, bitch. On direct, you testified that after you received the call from Miss Jameson, you went back to where she was.
Yes.
That you first checked in with her.
Yes.
When you were checking in with her, where were Miss Harwick and Mr. Pursehouse?
They had walked over to a bench against the wall in line of sight of where we were in line.
When you were checking in with Miss Jameson, were they already seated at the bench?
Yes.
They were no longer in line at that moment when you were checking with Ms. Jameson.
Yes.
You testified at a preliminary hearing in this case, right?
Yes, I did.
And at that preliminary hearing, that was under oath, right?
Yes.
Just like today.
Yes.
And when you testified on September 22nd, 2021, you specifically testified that you heard this statement as you were walking up when they were exiting the line.
I heard that statement as I walked up to them seated at the benches.
My question is, when you testified at the preliminary hearing, isn't it true that you testified that you, and I quote,
Which page, counsel?
Page 12 of volume 4, it's day 2 of his testimony, and this is at line 27. Something I heard as I was walking up when they were exiting the line was, you ruined my life, you bitch. Those were the actual words I heard.
Okay.
Was that your testimony on the 22nd?
If that's what the transcripts say, then yes.
So, it's your testimony today that it wasn't when they were exiting the line, it was when you walked up to them on the bench that you heard Mr. Pursehouse say, you ruined my life, bitch.
Yes.
Now, detectives interviewed you on February 18th, 2020, right?
Yes.
And that would have been Detective Masterson and Detective Carranza.
Yes.
And that was a month and 2 days after the XBiz awards.
Okay, yes.
And so that would be close in time to when the XBiz awards happened, right?
It would be about a month after the awards and about 5 days after her murder, yes.
I have a CD that I'd like to mark as defense B. February 18th, detective interview.
She established a foundation for why you're playing that?
Inconsistency.
Well, I haven't heard a foundation. Isn't it true that what? And he denies it, then what?
Isn't it true that when you were interviewed by the detectives on February 18th, you specifically said that you were not the person that heard the statement, you ruined my life, bitch?
I don't think that's the case. I don't remember saying that.
I do have a transcript that I'd like to pass out, Your Honor.
Well, I'd like to.
That counts to see it. All right.
In your statement to detectives on February 18th, 2020, you specifically told them that you were not the one that heard Mr. Pursehouse say, you ruined my life, bitch. Isn't that true?
If that's what the transcripts say,
I'm going to object as the response is calling for speculation.
Well, do you recall independently as you sit here whether you stated that, sir?
honestly, I do not, because
Okay. All right.
that interview was a blur.
All right, everything's a blur. Okay.
Would it refresh your recollection to look at a transcript of the testimony? Or of your statement to detectives?
I have
Yes.
a fresh recollection. Okay, go ahead. You can approach, counsel.
If I may just have a moment, sure.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
All right. If you could just read, this is page 7, line 20, and if you could read that entire paragraph.
To yourself, sir.
To yourself.
To myself?
Yes. And then if you could read, this is now page 8. If you could please read to line 4.
If you could read to line 11 for proper context.
All right.
4 to 11?
That's fine.
I mean, 1 to 11.
Okay. Did that refresh your recollection?
Yes.
And isn't it true that you told detectives on February 18th that it was according to what Miss Jameson and what Miss Harwick told you that Mr. Pursehouse said, "You ruined my life, bitch"?
In other words, you didn't hear it yourself.
I did hear it myself.
You did hear it
Yes.
yourself. Okay.
The question, though, is what you told detectives. Isn't it true that you told detectives?
Yes, according to that transcript, yes, that's what I said to them at that time.
Okay. So at that time, you told them that it wasn't you that heard that statement.
At the time of speaking to the detectives, because of the grief and the shock that I was experiencing, there was a lot of pieces to that puzzle, to that experience that were difficult to recollect. And for example, it wasn't until about a year and a half later that I remembered what we actually ate at Bob's Big Boy. And I think that's the idea of clarity coming up over time is important because that's shock.
Object at this point, it's non-responsive.
Well, he's explaining why he didn't understand. So you can move on, and
Sure.
his answer will remain that he was in shock and so forth, and things came. The recollection came slowly after that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Let's ask your next question.
And so, what you told detectives there in that interview on February 18th was a mistake.
Yes.
You actually had heard that statement.
Yes.
Now, when you were talking to detectives on February 18th, you wanted to tell them everything important that had happened at the XBiz Awards, right?
I think I tried to, yes.
You wanted to give them as much relevant information to help their investigation, right?
I think so, yes.
And you were obviously trying to tell the truth, right?
To the best of my recollection, I was trying to help, yes.
Now, in that interview with the detectives specifically made a point to tell you, look, we need to speak to that person who heard that statement from Mr. Pursehouse, right?
Okay.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
And that finding that person who heard that statement would be incredibly important, right?
Okay, yes.
They told you that they needed somebody with personal first-hand knowledge, right?
Yes.
And you told them that you would contact that person right away.
Yes.
You said that you actually had contacted one of the people that was in the line with Miss Harwick when Mr. Pursehouse approached, but that person didn't remember anything. Do you
Yes.
remember that? And that
Is there a response to that?
No.
Did you say yes, sir?
I said yes.
All right.
and that Miss Jameson was in like Mexico or Costa Rica or something, but that when she got back, you would talk to her.
Yes.
And you did. After the interview, you did in fact contact Miss Jameson.
Yes.
And you told her she needed to talk to the detectives.
I passed along the detectives' information to her to contact them, yes.
Specifically so that she could tell them what she heard.
Yes.
So it's your testimony today that mistake you made when you were talking to the detectives about not hearing that statement, that mistake was a mistake you made because you were in shock.
Yes.
Now, isn't it, so it's fair to say your testimony is that state of shock affected your memory?
Yes.
Isn't it true that when you first arrived into the room for that interview with the detectives, you and the detectives kind of joked around a little bit?
It's likely, yes.
You made some comment about how the room smelled bad, but
Counsel, let's move on. Ask your questions, if you will, please.
Okay, so you all kind of chuckled and smiled. You remember that?
Yes.
Again, counsel, let's move on.
I have 3 more questions.
Okay, go ahead.
You made small talk about computers and different things.
Yes.
So for you personally, in that moment, you were able to still kind of make jokes and be social while in shock.
At that time and after her murder, I still interacted with people. I still worked and saw clients. And what you're describing, I think, is humor as a defense mechanism. People will cope with grief and loss and shock in different ways.
And for you, both things were possible. You can feel shock and deep sadness and also be able to do those things that you're describing, right?
Yes.
On direct, you testified about Miss Harwick's demeanor that night. I'd like to talk about that briefly. So you testified that initially, going to the event, that she was excited,
Yes.
that she was thrilled, right?
Yes.
But that after running into Mr. Pursehouse, her mood changed.
Yes.
I think one of the descriptions you used was that she almost became like a ghost.
Yes.
And kind of similar to what you were describing about your ability to function and use humor as a defense mechanism, she, at the XBiz Awards, was able to put on a face, right?
Yes.
She was able to smile for the pictures on the red carpet.
Yes.
You introduced her to friends at the event.
Yes.
From your observations of her, it is your testimony that you believe she was experiencing negative emotions, but still was able to go through the motions of being at a social event and being kind of on, basically.
Yes.
On direct, you testified that you realized you had made a separate mistake about Ms. Harwick providing her phone number to Mr. Pursehouse.
Yes.
And just briefly, the mistake that you made was in your interview with the detectives, you erroneously told them that Ms. Harwick had provided her phone number to Mr. Pursehouse.
Yes.
At some point, you reviewed the transcript of your interview with the detectives.
Yes.
And in reviewing that transcript, you realized that mistake that you made.
Yes.
And so what you did is you went back through your text messages with Ms. Harwick, and you took a screenshot of the text message that was shown to you by Mr. Avila,
Yes.
showing that she said something along the lines that she didn't give him.
But Gareth found her number online.
Right.
Yes.
Now, after reviewing your transcript of the interview with detectives, you did not tell them that you had made a mistake about not hearing this.
Let's move on from that issue. Let's move on, if you would.
Well, that he never corrected that. That's all I'm asking.
Did you ever apprise the detectives that that was incorrect?
I don't know when I did, but I did eventually. I'm not sure what the date was.
Okay, but you didn't do the same thing that you did with this other error after reading the transcript. You didn't tell the detectives, oh, I made this other mistake. I said somebody else heard the statement, but in fact I did hear the statement. You never did that.
Objection.
You just said at some point he did. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you know when?
I do not know.
Your testimony at the preliminary hearing was on September 21st, 2021. If you recall.
I don't know, but I'll trust it. That's the date.
Would it refresh your recollection to look at a face page of...
That's okay. Let's go on with it. That's what the court will take note. Is that the date?
It is.
Okay.
That's the date of his first day of testimony.
All right.
And so that's over a year and a half after your interview with the detectives.
Yes.
Prior to the interview with the detectives on February 18th, 2020, you'd been consuming a lot of media about the case.
Yes.
Prior to your testimony at the preliminary hearing, you also had been consuming a lot of media about the case.
Yes.
You were reading everything you could find about it.
I think it's when a friend or family member is murdered in such a horrific manner, it's natural for people to want to seek out the truth or understand what happened.
Okay. So is that a yes, that you were reading everything that you could find about it?
I think in the first month or so, yes, I did read.
You wanted to know as much as possible about the case as you could.
Yes.
That reading about it helped you understand what happened.
It helped me process. One of my closest friends was murdered, yes. I wanted to understand who did it and why and what happened.
Prior to your testimony at the preliminary hearing, you were interviewed by Detective Masterson, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Avila.
Yes.
And another Deputy District Attorney, Mr. Dryling.
Yes.
And that interview was not recorded.
I don't know if it was recorded or not.
Did they tell you that it was being recorded?
I cannot recall.
And in that interview, prior to your testimony at the preliminary hearing, you didn't tell them that your memory had changed and that you remembered hearing that statement yourself.
Again, counsel, we keep going back to that. Let's leave that issue. Let's move on. You made your point.
Also, foundation, if he was asked that question.
Okay. But the question was, did you tell him? So they don't need to ask him for him to volunteer. So let's move on if you would.
And prior to your testimony yesterday and today, did you speak with the detective or the district attorneys in this case about the events?
Yes.
When?
I don't know the exact date, but it was within the last couple of weeks. I went to review my transcripts.
And did you discuss your testimony?
No.
Do you know if that conversation was recorded?
I don't know.
Okay, so let's go back to the XBiz event. And let's talk about that second conversation between Ms. Harwick and Mr. Pursehouse. So it was your testimony that about 10 minutes before the end of the program, Mr. Pursehouse approaches the table that you and Ms. Harwick were seated at, right?
Yes.
Were you and Ms. Harwick sitting next to each other?
Yes.
And he kneels down to talk to her, right?
Yes.
And he spoke in her ear.
Yes.
And even though you were sitting next to her, you couldn't hear what he was saying.
No.
And so he was speaking in a low volume.
More like a whisper into someone's ear. Yeah.
And you understand from what Ms. Harwick told you that he had asked to speak to him again, right?
Yes.
And she agreed.
Yes.
So does she get up and go talk to him before the program ended, or right when the program ended?
He walked away from the table. We stayed at the table until the end of the show, and then she got up and said, I'm going to go talk in the same bench area.
Okay. And you testified on direct that initially you didn't go with them to the area that they went.
No.
You remained in the ballroom.
Yes.
How long did you remain in the ballroom?
I mean, people were shuffling out probably 15 to 20 minutes. I mean,
And then after that after remaining in the ballroom for 15 to 20 minutes, you went out to the area where they were having the conversation.
Yeah.
And you waited there until it was done.
Not exactly. I went out there, just checked and leaned my head over. I saw them sitting down there, and then I went back inside of the ballroom to continue talking to some people. And that was when we started exchanging some text messages for the next 15 or 20 minutes, just me checking in to see if she was okay and if they were still talking.
Were you in the room that they were talking in when the conversation ended?
Yes. So once everyone left out of the ballroom, I went outside and then grabbed a chair and sat in the line of sight from the two of them and just waited. So initially they went together outside to talk.
No question pending.
All right. Distinct.
I'd like to mark defense, an exhibit that I'd like to mark as defense C.
All right.
It's a screenshot of the text message chain. And I approach.
Yes.
Can we see some of these exhibits before they're shown to the witness?
Is that just one page?
2 pages.
So that'll be defense C 1 and 2. So if you're making reference to page 1 and page 2. All right?
Thank you, Ron.
Yes.
Mr. Chavez, can you look at these 2 pages and tell me if you recognize these pages?
Yes, I recognize both pages.
How do you recognize them?
These are screenshots from my phone, and they are text messages between Amie and I after the show while we were still at the XBiz Awards.
Okay. And so these are the text messages that you're sending back and forth while she is having her conversation, the second conversation with Mr. Pursehouse, right?
Yes.
Okay. Publishing C1. So the left is text messages from Ms. Harwick, and the right is responses from you, right?
Yes.
And so at 11:23, she tells you, I'm around to the right talking. I'm okay, right?
Yes.
And so did you understand that to mean that she was letting you know where she and Mr. Pursehouse was?
Yes.
Check calling for speculation.
Well, he said, did you take that to mean? And so that's how he understood it. Not that it was correct. Go ahead.
You may answer.
Yes, I knew where she was at.
Well, she's telling you in that text message, she's saying, this is where I am.
Yes.
Right.
It's where we talked about her being, and she was there.
And then you respond with the thank you emoji. Right?
Yes.
Is that the prayer hands?
Sorry?
Is that the prayer hands emoji?
Is that what it means? Prayer hands?
Prayer
Means
hands.
thank you?
I don't think the witness.
Well, they're prayer hands. Is that how you responded?
Yeah, like more of a prayer, like,
Okay.
thank you.
Very good.
You know.
It's a common emoji for thank you, right?
Well, just, for, acknowledging and honoring somebody responding to you.
And so your response was right after she sent you that text message at 11:23, right?
Yes.
And then 16 minutes pass, and you ask, still talking, right?
Yes.
She responds, yes, right?
Yes.
And so you were asking her, are you still talking to Mr. Pursehouse?
Yes.
And you text her, okay, I'll be floating around, I'll walk you to your car.
Yes.
All right? Just let me know when you're ready. And there's an arrow that's kind of blocking that, but do you agree that you responded just LMK when you're ready? In other words, just let me know when you're ready.
Yes.
Publishing C2. So after 21 minutes, she responds and she says, okay, just a few minutes, almost done. Right?
Yes.
So she's saying, almost done with the conversation.
I'm going to object as to calling the witness to speculate as to what else she's saying.
All right. Sustained. The statement speaks for itself. Let's move on.
And then you say, are you downstairs or upstairs? Where should I head towards?
Yes.
And so when she was almost done with this conversation, you didn't know where she was.
She was in. So there was the lobby area downstairs where everyone was.
Well, he's trying to explain. Let him explain.
The question is, when she sent that text message,
I knew where she was at, but I wanted to make
Don't
sure.
Take over each other. Go ahead.
when she sent that text message, you did not know where she was.
No. I sent that text message to.
Objection.
The answer is no. Go ahead. We'll ask your next question.
And so she tells you where she is. She says she's upstairs, right?
Yes.
And that she's walking past the bar and that she'll meet you in that main area, right?
Yes.
You just finished testifying that you stayed in the ballroom for 15 to 20 minutes.
Yes.
Okay. And then at some point you go and check in on them, but then you go back into the ballroom.
Yes.
And then at some point later, you go into the area where they were talking, and you find a chair and sit.
Yes.
How long were you sitting in that chair before the conversation ended?
Probably another 10 to 15 minutes until I got tired and everybody was cleared out, and so I wanted to leave. I wanted to end it.
And you walked over and told them, I want to go.
Yeah.
Mark as defense D, which is a CD with an excerpt from the detective interview.
Okay, again.
The transcript.
See that as well.
My approach.
Yes. Not certain.
Prior inconsistent statement, Your Honor.
More of the trial of the Hollywood sex therapist killer is on the way. Press subscribe now so you don't miss a moment of this riveting courtroom drama as we seek justice for Dr. Amie Harwick.